What's up YouTube? This is Andrew with Programming Liftoff, and today we're going to complete part 3 of the PyQt tutorial, calculator tutorial. So in this part we're going to implement the digits so we can press digits. We'll also be able to use the decimal point. We'll be able to use the plus minus button and the percent button. So let's get started. So I'm going to close this, and I have the project that we left off with opened up. So as you can see, the buttons don't work yet. So let's get started implementing those. So first we're going to open the calculator.py file. We're going to add a new, it'll be a slot for our calculator. And what a slot is it's essentially a method that is called when a button is pressed. So let's add a digit pressed slot. Alright, and for now we'll just have it print test. And we'll need to connect some buttons to the slot. So to do that, we will say self.pushButton underscore 0. And we'll want to do this inside the init method. .clicked.connect self.digitPressed, and you want to make sure that you don't have parentheses after the method name, or else it will try to call the method, and we don't want to call it yet. We just want to connect a button to it. So as you can see, when I press these buttons, it doesn't do anything. When I press the 0, it prints test down here as it should. So now let's connect the rest of the buttons. We'll just copy and paste it. Alright, so now we have all the buttons connected. So now let's implement this slot. So we'll say we'll start with button. We'll declare a variable button and say equals self.sender. And what that will do is we have all these buttons that can call the same slot. So we want to figure out what button emitted the signal to call the slot. So when you press 0, the button will hold the information about the 0 button. So once we do that, we can say self.label.setText. We'll set it equal to button text, and we'll run that. So this is our label up here. So we're setting the text equal to whatever button we press, and that looks like it's working. But obviously, we don't want to replace the whole number. We want to append to the label. So we'll just add self.label.text plus button.text. So that should get the label text and append the text to the button. So that looks like it's working, but as you can see, we have a leading 0, and that's because the label started off as 0 and we appended to that, and we don't want the 0 in front. So to get rid of that, we're going to convert it to a float. So to do that, we'll declare a variable called new label, and we'll set it equal to float, and we'll just grab this, and we can get rid of that now and replace it with new label. And we need to convert that to a string because that's a float type, and we're going to display it as text as a string. So we can run that now. But as you can see, if we type 8, it converts it to a float, which naturally, just by default, shows a decimal point, 0.0. So if we type 8 and then 1, it prints 8.01. And what we want is 81. So to fix that, we are going to format the output. So after we convert it to a float, we'll wrap that in a format function, and we'll use .15g, which will just set the output. It'll set the format of the floating point number to a format that doesn't show the decimal if it doesn't need it. So we can then remove this string. We don't need to convert it to a string anymore because the format converts it to a string for us. So now if we run that, we can see if we type 8 and 1, it prints 81 as we want it to. And then all the buttons can be entered. And we can't use the decimal point yet, so let's implement that. So we'll define decimal pressed. And we'll say self.label.setText. Self.label.text plus a decimal. And we'll need to connect the button to that. So self.pushButton decimal.clicked.connect to self.decimal pressed. And make sure you don't have the parentheses after that. So let's test that. So we type 56.3. As you can see, the decimal works. One thing to note here is that we don't check to see if there's a decimal already. So if you press decimal again and again, it'll keep adding it. So we're not going to do that error checking in this example. But if you want to do that, you just have to go into this method, and if there's check to see if there's a decimal in the text already, in the label text. If there is a decimal, don't add it. If there is not a decimal, then you'll do this line, which adds the decimal. Alright, so now that we have that, we're going to add a new slot. And we'll call it unary operation pressed. And inside this, we'll get the sender. And the reason why we didn't need to get the sender and decimal pressed is because there's only one button connected to this slot. So when this slot is called, we know what button called it, so we know what to do, which is append a decimal. And the digits, we have multiple digits that can call this slot, and this button, the unary operation, will have two buttons that can call it. So the first thing we'll do, no matter what button called it, is say label number. So we'll create a new variable. So this will just get the label text and convert it to a float, so we can work with it as a number. And then we'll check to see if the button.text, if the button text is equal to the plus minus button. And if it is, then we are going to take the label number and set it equal to label number times -1. And then we'll say else, and then we'll just add a comment to say that the button text must have been equal to %, because that's the only other button that we're going to connect to the slot. So if that's the case, then label number will be set to label number times 0.01. Alright, so after we do that calculation, we're going to create a new label variable. And we're just going to format label number with the same format we used above. And then we're going to set the text to the new label. Alright, so now that that slot is defined, we will connect some buttons to it. Alright, so the first one we'll connect is plus minus. and then we'll say self.pushButton _%. Percent clicked, connect that to unary operation pressed as well. So now both of these buttons should be connected. So if we type 8, we can make it positive or negative, and we can make it percent as well. And the rest of these buttons still work. So that'll do it for this part of the tutorial. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next parts where we'll implement the rest of the buttons.